Regret is one of the most private experiences available to a human being. It does not perform itself. It does not seek an audience. It does not arrive with a visible, legible, communicable quality of emotions that are organized around other people and therefore find their natural expression in other people's presence. Regret turns inward. It lives in the specific, quiet, often sleepless territory of a person alone with the honest accounting of what they did and what it cost and what the cost means about who they are and who they have been. And for an avoidant, whose entire psychological architecture is organized around the management of difficult interior experience, around the routing of uncomfortable feeling away from its most direct and honest form, regret is one of the most demanding and most poorly managed emotional experiences available. Because regret cannot be managed away without losing its honest content. Because the specific, targeted, pointed quality of genuine regret requires a degree of sustained self-confrontation that the avoidant defenses were built precisely to prevent. Because sitting with regret honestly means sitting with the full, unqualified, cannot be contextualized into something more comfortable truth of having caused damage to someone who did not deserve it. And that sitting, sustained, honest, without the exit routes that the management strategies usually provide, is the most demanding thing the avoidant psychology is capable of producing. The avoidant who hurt you is in that sitting right now. Not cleanly, not without the attempt to manage and reframe and find the softer version of the accounting, but genuinely, at some level of their interior that the management strategies are not fully reaching. And what is happening there, the specific texture and content of the regret, what it is about and what it is pointing toward and what it does and does not mean, is what this conversation is about. The first clarification that honest examination requires is about what regret actually is in the psychological sense, as distinct from related experiences that are often confused with it and that produce very different outcomes. Regret is not guilt, though it contains guilt. Guilt is the experience of having done something wrong. It is morally oriented. It is organized around the wrongness of the act rather than around the full weight of what the act produced. Guilt can be managed through apology and forgiveness and the restoration of moral equilibrium, without requiring the deeper, more personally confronting examination that genuine regret demands. Guilt says, I did something wrong and I am sorry. Regret says, I did something wrong and I am sitting with the full, specific personal weight of what wrong actually means in this case, with the specific person I harmed, with the specific cost to that specific person, with the specific gap between who I was capable of being and who I actually was when it mattered. Regret is also not remorse, though it contains remorse. Remorse is the emotional pain of having caused harm. It is affect-oriented. It is the feeling of the wrongness rather than the full cognitive and emotional reckoning with it. Remorse can be genuine and significant and still not produce change, because remorse is organized around the feeling of having done wrong, rather than around the full understanding of what the wrong consisted of and what it would require to not repeat it. Remorse says this hurts. Regret says, this hurts, and I am going to understand exactly why it hurts, and what my specific contribution to the hurt was, and what that contribution says about the patterns I have been running, and whether I am willing to do the work of changing them. Genuine regret is the most demanding of the three, because it requires both the emotional weight of remorse and the cognitive, honest, specific examination of guilt, and it adds to both of them the forward-looking, accountability-bearing, genuinely reckoning quality of someone who is not just feeling the wrongness or acknowledging the wrongness, but working to understand it at the level of depth required to actually do something different. The avoidant who hurt you is capable of all three. The question of which one is actually running, and whether the regret is genuine in this full sense, or is a mixture of guilt and remorse that is being called regret without quite reaching the full demanding version, is one that only behavioral evidence over time can adequately answer. What the avoidant is specifically in regret about is not a single, undifferentiated mass of general wrongdoing. Genuine regret has content. It is about specific things. And understanding the specific content of avoidant regret, the particular things that tend to produce the deepest and most persistent regret in someone who has genuinely hurt a person they cared about, illuminates both the psychology and the specific texture of what is happening in their interior right now. The first and most surface-level regret is about the obvious moments, the specific instances of clearly identifiable hurt. The things they said that landed badly, the withdrawals that came at particularly damaging moments, the failures of repair that were most visible, These are the easiest regrets to access because they are the most concrete. They have the specific quality of events that can be pointed to, examined, and acknowledged as wrong without requiring the deeper excavation of the patterns that produced them. This level of regret is available to most avoidants who have caused significant hurt and is not on its own the indicator of genuine reckoning. It is the beginning of the accounting, but not the accounting itself. The second level is regret about the pattern. The recognition that the specific instances were not isolated failures of behavior, but expressions of a consistent, recurring, deeply grooved way of being in relationship that produced not just those specific moments, but the entire architecture of a dynamic that was chronically insufficient. The regret at this level is harder to access and more genuinely reckoning. It requires the avoidant to move from this thing I did to this is who I have been, from specific acts to characteristic pattern, from individual moments to the sustained reality of what it was like to be loved by them. This transition, from the specific to the pattern, is where the genuine self-confrontation begins, because the pattern cannot be addressed through the apology for the specific moment. The pattern requires the acknowledgement of itself as a pattern and the genuine, sustained engagement with what changing it would require. The third level is the deepest and the most rarely reached in the early stages of avoidant regret. It is the regret about what they took from you, not what they did to you in the active sense, what they took, the specific things their patterns removed from your experience of the relationship and from the version of yourself that the relationship was shaping, the confidence that was eroded by the consistent insufficient reciprocation, the perception that was made to doubt itself, the pre-qualification habit that was built through the repeated experience of full expression not being met, the baseline for what adequate love looks like that was distorted downward, the version of yourself that was quietly, gradually shaped by the chronic experience of being with someone whose patterns kept requiring you to be smaller. This level of regret is the most honest and the most demanding, because it requires the avoidant to account not just for what they actively did, but for what their presence passively produced. For the specific costs of a dynamic that was running on an imbalance that they were benefiting from and you were absorbing. For the reality that their patterns were not simply affecting the moments in which they were visibly operating, but were shaping, continuously and cumulatively, the interior landscape of someone who trusted them enough to be shaped. The avoidance regret at all three levels tends to arrive in a specific sequence that is worth understanding, because the sequence illuminates where they are in the reckoning and what the reckoning is likely to produce. The first stage is the regret arriving as a feeling before it has adequate content, the specific, uncomfortable, difficult to attribute interior experience of something being wrong, something heavy, something that the ordinary management strategies are not resolving. Something that appears reliably in the quiet moments, in the unmanaged spaces, in the specific hours when the defensive architecture is tired and the feeling has less resistance to move through. This stage often presents as restlessness, as a persistent, low-level, cannot quite be placed wrongness, as the experience of being in the correct position in the narrative of their own life, having moved on, having restored the equilibrium, having arranged the external architecture of forward motion, and finding that the interior experience is not matching the external arrangement. The second stage is the regret finding its content, the attribution, increasingly specific and increasingly honest, of the feeling to its accurate source. The movement from the vague heaviness to the specific targeted acknowledgement of what the heaviness is about. This stage tends to involve the involuntary memory, the specific unbidden arrival of particular moments from the dynamic that present themselves for honest examination rather than for comfortable recollection. The moment when the withdrawal was chosen over the staying. The moment when the repair was available and was not made. The moment when the impact on you was visible and was not met. These moments arrive in the regret stage with a specific pointed quality that is different from ordinary memory. They arrive with the weight of what was not done alongside what was done, with the gap between the action and the better available action showing clearly. The third stage is the regret reaching the level of genuine self-confrontation. The stage at which the specific content of the regret produces not just the feeling and the attribution, but the honest examination of what the pattern says about the avoidant's own interior, about the fears that produced the withdrawal, about the specific recurring ways the defense was chosen over the love, about the gap, the specific personal painful gap between the version of themselves they want to be and the version that actually showed up in the dynamic. This stage is the most demanding and the most psychologically significant. It is where the regret becomes the genuine reckoning rather than the sustained, managed, not quite resolved discomfort of someone who knows they did something wrong without fully examining what the wrong consisted of. What does deep regret look like in an avoidance behavior? Because the interior experience of regret, however genuine, produces behavioral expressions that are often indirect, ambiguous, and easily misread as things they are not. Understanding the specific behavioral signatures of genuine avoidant regret is practically important for anyone trying to assess what is actually happening on the other side of the dynamic. The first signature is a change in the quality of any contact that occurs. When the avoidant makes contact, and genuine regret eventually produces some form of contact, however tentative and however inadequately framed, the contact carries a different weight than the urgency-driven, loss-activated reaching that other forms of avoidant activation produce. It is slower, less confident in its own reception. It has the specific quality of someone who is not sure they have the right to be reaching, who is aware, at some level, that the reaching is complicated by what preceded it, who is making contact not from the position of someone who expects the contact to restore the comfortable configuration, but from the position of someone who is genuinely uncertain about what the contact will or should produce. This uncertainty, the specific present not being performed uncertainty of genuine regret, is different from the avoidance usual quality of contact. The usual contact carries, underneath whatever tone it is wrapped in, the background assumption that the connection is still available, and the contact is simply the avoidant choosing to re-engage with it. The contact produced by genuine regret does not have that assumption. It has the quality of someone approaching something they are not sure they are still entitled to approach. And that quality, humble, uncertain, genuinely not assuming, is the behavioral signature of regret that has reached the level of honest reckoning. The second signature is the specific kind of listening that regret produces. When someone is in genuine regret, they listen differently. They are not listening to manage the conversation toward the comfortable outcome. They are not listening to find the point at which sufficient acknowledgement has been offered to allow the subject to be closed. They are listening with the specific open, receiving quality of someone who understands that they do not yet have the full picture of what the dynamic cost and who is genuinely trying to understand, rather than genuinely trying to produce the impression of understanding. This listening tolerates your complexity. It tolerates your anger. It tolerates the specific, complicated, not easily resolved mixture of things that the dynamic produced in you. It does not require your response to be warm or simple or organized around the comfort of the person doing the reckoning. It stays in the discomfort of being accountable without requiring the other person's response to reduce the discomfort. The third signature is the specifically honest quality of anything they say about their own patterns. Not the performed honesty of someone who has learned the right language for discussing avoidant attachment and is deploying it fluently without the genuine, personally confronting relationship to its content. The specific, slightly awkward, not quite fluent honesty of someone who is saying something true that they have not said before, that is not prepared. That arrives without the smooth delivery of something that has been rehearsed into comfort. Genuine regret produces speech that sounds like something is being worked out rather than something being presented. That has the specific quality of a person in the middle of honest examination rather than a person reporting the conclusions of completed examination. And that quality, the in progress still being understood, genuinely not resolved quality of someone actually reckoning, is one of the most specific and reliable indicators of regret that has reached the honest level. Here is where the conversation requires a shift in direction, because everything up to this point has been about the avoidance regret, about their interior, about the specific texture and content and behavioral signatures of what they are experiencing. And all of that is worth understanding accurately. It is real, and it is significant, and it has practical relevance for assessing the situation you're in. But the shift needs to occur here, toward you, toward what the avoidance deep regret means for your actual situation. Not in the abstract, practically. In the specific daily decision-relevant sense of what to do with the knowledge that the person who hurt you is in genuine regret about it. The first thing the knowledge does not require of you is immediate availability. The avoidance regret is their experience. It is happening in their interior, it is producing its genuine discomfort and its honest confrontation in their private reckoning. None of that is your responsibility to address on any particular timeline. The regret does not create an obligation, does not require your presence to be resolved, does not need your forgiveness or your warmth or your re-engagement. in order to be what it is and do what it is doing. Your timeline is yours. The pace at which you process what happened, at which you assess what the regret means and what evidence would be required to make any re-engagement worth considering, at which you decide whether you want any form of engagement at all. That pace is determined by what you actually need, not by the pressure of the avoidance regret requiring a response, not by the pull of the knowledge that genuine regret is present and the love in you recognizes it as genuine, not by the specific human difficulty of knowing someone is in pain about what they did and sitting with the complexity of caring about that while also caring adequately for yourself. Your timeline, your pace, your genuine, unhurried, self-directed process. The second thing the knowledge requires is honest assessment rather than either hopeful inflation or protective dismissal. Hopeful inflation converts genuine regret into more than it is, takes the behavioral signatures of honest reckoning and reads them as the arrival of genuine change rather than as the beginning of the process of change. Treats the regret itself as the evidence that things will be different without requiring the behavioral evidence over ordinary time that genuine change actually produces. This inflation is understandable. It is the natural human response of someone who loves a person and has been hoping for the honest reckoning and encounters something that looks like the honest reckoning. But the inflation mistakes the beginning for the conclusion. Regret is the beginning of the process. Change is the conclusion. And the distance between the two is real and significant and cannot be closed by the quality of the regret alone. Protective dismissal converts genuine regret into less than it is, takes the behavioral signatures of honest reckoning and reads them through the specific, understandable, self-protective lens of someone who has been hurt and is guarding against being hurt again. Labels the regret as performance or manipulation or the urgency of loss masquerading as genuine accountability. This dismissal is also understandable. Also, the natural response of someone who has absorbed enough damage to have developed the specific adaptive caution of someone who has been let down by the same pattern repeatedly. But the dismissal also misses something real. Genuine regret is a genuine thing. It is different from performed regret, and the difference is real and matters. The honest assessment holds both. Genuine regret is present. Genuine regret is not the same as genuine change. Both things are true. And the honest assessment asks the questions that the space between the two requires. What specific, behavioral, overordinary time evidence would demonstrate that the regret has produced genuine change? What would I need to see in the everyday moments when nothing is at stake to believe that the pattern has actually shifted rather than being temporarily overridden by the urgency of the reckoning? What is the actual, non-negotiable, will not be softened by warmth standard for what re-engagement would require? Those questions answered honestly, without either the inflation or the dismissal. That is the honest assessment. The third thing the knowledge of their deep regret does is offer something specific to you that is independent of any decision about re-engagement. It offers the confirmation that what happened was real, that the hurt was recognized, that the accounting of the dynamic you have been doing in your own interior is not your subjective inflation, but the honest reading of something that the person on the other side of it is also, finally, honestly reckoning with. That confirmation is not small. The specific, privately expensive, sometimes lonely project of maintaining your own honest accounting of what the dynamic was and what it cost. That accounting was correct. The hurt was real. The pattern was real. The insufficiency was real. And the avoidance deep regret is the most honest available confirmation of all of it. Not because you needed their confirmation. The accounting was correct regardless. But because the confirmation lands in a place that the long experience of being doubted, of having the accurate perception managed and reframed and made to feel less reliable than it was, left tender. And the landing of honest confirmation in a tender place is its own specific, genuine, quiet form of healing. Even if nothing else changes, even if the regret does not produce the change, even if the evidence never arrives, or arrives insufficiently, or arrives too late, or in a form you are not in a position to build on. The confirmation that the accounting was correct, that the cost was real, that the dynamic was what you knew it was, and the perception that kept trying to tell you clearly was accurate the whole time. That is yours, regardless, and it is worth receiving honestly. Not as a reason to return, not as a reason to stay away permanently, simply as the honest, finally arrived acknowledgement of what was true, which you knew. And now they know. And the knowing on both sides is where everything that comes next, for both of you, separately or together, in whatever honest direction the evidence eventually supports, becomes genuinely possible. Built on truth rather than on the management of it, which is the only foundation worth building on. Built on truth rather than on the management of it. That phrase deserves to be held for a moment before moving forward. Because truth, in the context of avoidant regret and what it means for you, is not a single thing. It is layered. And some of the layers have been given more attention in this conversation than others. The layer that has received the most attention is the avoidance interior. The regret, its content, its stages, its behavioral signatures, its potential to produce genuine change. That layer is real and worth understanding. And there are other layers of truth that belong equally to this moment and that deserve honest attention alongside it. The truth about regret is that it arrives after the damage. This is not a cruel observation. It is the plain, important, often overlooked reality of what regret is and when it appears. Regret is retrospective by definition. It is organized around the past. It arrives when the accounting of the past becomes honest enough to produce the full weight of what the past contained. And its arrival after the damage does not make it less genuine, but it does mean something specific about its relationship to you and your current situation. You processed the damage while it was occurring. You did not have the luxury of retrospective accounting. You were doing the accounting in real time in the middle of the dynamic, while also absorbing the ongoing cost of the dynamic, while also maintaining your own functioning, while also loving someone whose patterns kept producing the very damage you were trying to account for. That is a fundamentally different experience from the retrospective accounting of regret. It is harder, it is more costly, it is done without the clarity that distance provides. And it produced something that the avoidance regret is only now beginning to approach. The honest, specific, fully weighted understanding of what the dynamic was and what it cost. You arrived at that understanding first, through the harder route, without the benefit of distance or the organizing clarity of retrospect. That is worth naming directly, rather than allowing the focus on the avoidance regret to imply a symmetry that does not exist. The avoidance deep regret is, among other things, the delayed arrival at an understanding that you were working toward throughout the dynamic. The understanding that the pattern was producing real damage. That the person on the receiving end of the pattern was being consistently, specifically, cumulatively harmed in ways that were real and significant, and not the product of that person being too sensitive or too demanding, or unable to manage the ordinary difficulties of a complicated relationship. You knew this while you were in it. You knew it with a specific, embodied, accurate perception of someone who was experiencing the damage directly. And the dynamic, through the various mechanisms of avoidant defensive architecture, kept making that knowing feel less reliable than it was, kept inserting doubt between the perception and the confidence in the perception, kept producing alternative framings of the dynamic that located the difficulty somewhere other than in the pattern that was actually producing it. The avoidance regret removes those alternative framings. It is the honest confirmation from the person who was operating the pattern that the pattern was what you knew it was, that the damage was what you experienced it as being, that the perception you were being encouraged to doubt was accurate the whole time. This confirmation does something specific to the residual self-doubt that the dynamic deposited, the specific, quiet, often unacknowledged doubt about whether you were reading things correctly, whether you were being fair, whether the accounting you were doing was the honest accounting or the distorted accounting of someone who was too close to see clearly. The confirmation of the avoidance regret is the honest answer to that doubt. The accounting was correct. The perception was accurate. The understanding you arrived at, through the harder route, in real time, under the ongoing cost of the dynamic, that understanding was right. That is not a small thing to receive. Even now, even with the distance of detachment between you and the dynamic, the confirmation that you were not wrong lands in a place that the doubt had been occupying, and does something genuine in that place. Something settling, something that is not the dramatic relief of vindication, but the quiet, specific, permanent relief of knowing that the knowing was trustworthy all along. There is something else the avoidance regret makes available that is worth examining honestly, not as a reason to return or as a measure of what the relationship can become. As a piece of information about the nature of what existed between you, the depth of genuine regret is proportional to the significance of what was damaged. Shallow regret attends to minor damages. Deep regret attends to significant ones. The specific, sustained, privately consuming quality of deep regret the kind that persists through the attempt to move on, that breaks through in the unmanaged moments, that has not resolved through the ordinary management strategies? Is the regret of someone who is reckoning with the loss of something that was genuinely significant? Not significant in the abstract, significant in the specific, personal, irreplaceable sense of a connection that mattered at the level where genuine things matter? A connection whose loss is felt in the specific, targeted way of something that cannot be substituted for by the ordinary available alternatives. A connection whose damage is registered at the level of genuine personal consequence rather than managed discomfort. The depth of their regret is the honest measure of the depth of what existed, not of what they were able to express while it was present, of what was actually there underneath the management and the defensive architecture and the patterns that kept preventing it from being adequately expressed. The genuine depth of the connection was there the whole time. The regret is its honest witness. You were not wrong about that either. The depth you perceived was real. The significance you felt on your side was matched by a significance on theirs that their patterns were preventing from being adequately expressed. The connection was as real as it felt. The regret confirms it. What do you do, practically and emotionally, with the receipt of this confirmation? With the genuine knowledge that the regret is deep and the significance was real, and the accounting you were doing all along was accurate. The first thing you do is allow yourself to receive it, not immediately converting it into a decision about the future, or a reason for a specific action, or a revision of the story you have been building toward clarity and self-possession. Simply receiving it, allowing the confirmation to land in the places it needs to land, the place where the self-doubt was, the place where the perception was made to feel unreliable, the place where the genuine depth of the connection was sometimes obscured by the dynamic's consistent insufficiency, allowing the honest confirmation of those things to do its genuine, specific settling work. This receiving is not weakness. It is not the loosening of the standards that the whole arc of this experience has been building. It is the honest, clear-eyed reception of accurate information that belongs to the full picture of what this was. The full picture includes the damage and the regret, includes the insufficiency and the genuine depth, includes the hurt and the honest reckoning. All of it is part of the true account, and receiving the confirmation does not require you to revise the part of the account that the regret is confirming. It requires you to allow the account to be complete. The second thing you do is maintain the standard that was established through the whole arc of this experience. That adequate love shows up in ordinary conditions. That the change required to make re-engagement worth considering is behavioral and over time and visible in the everyday moments when nothing is at stake. That genuine regret is the beginning of the process of change rather than the conclusion of it. That the specific, behavioral instance-level evidence of someone who is doing things differently is the only reliable indicator that the regret has produced what regret points toward. Maintaining the standard does not require hardness. It requires clarity. The clarity of someone who has done the full, honest, costly work of understanding their own worth and what the minimum conditions for a genuine relationship are. That clarity is not a wall. It is a floor, below which the love you are capable of offering will not be taken again. The third thing you do is continue. Continue the building of the life that the detachment was pointing toward. Continue the daily, ordinary, genuine inhabiting of the version of yourself that is more fully available now that the dynamic is not consuming the bandwidth. Continue the restoration of the perceptual confidence, the accurate baseline, the pre-qualification habit unlearning. Continue toward the version of your days that is not organized around the monitoring of someone else's interior, but around the genuine, forward-moving, fully inhabited experience of your own. The avoidance deep regret is happening. It is real. It is significant. It is doing something in their interior that may or may not produce the genuine behavioral overtime change that the regret is pointing toward. And it is their experience, their interior, their reckoning, their work. Yours is already further along, not because yours was easier, because yours was done first, in real time, through the harder route, without the benefit of retrospect or distance or the organizing clarity of loss. You did the work while it was most difficult to do, while the dynamic was still running, while the hope was still present, while the love was still active and the pull towards staying was still powerful, and the accounting was happening against the resistance of everything that wanted to continue to believe the pattern could change, without the change being required. You did that work, and it brought you here, to the detachment, to the complete reorientation, to the specific, clear, self-possessed place of someone who knows what happened and what it cost, and what they are worth and what they will and will not accept as the terms of their love going forward. That place is not the end. It is the ground from which everything that comes next becomes possible. The clear, stable, honest ground of someone who sees fully without the distortion of either hope or bitterness. Who can receive the confirmation of the avoidant's genuine regret without being moved from the ground by it? Who can hold the depth of what existed without using the depth as justification for accepting the insufficiency? That ground is yours, permanent, built through everything the experience required of you. The regret confirms what you built it to hold, your own honest worth, your own accurate perception, your own clear, specific, entirely deserved knowledge of what love owes you, which is the real thing, present, daily, ordinary, and entirely worth holding out for. Holding out for the real thing is not a passive act. It is not the patient waiting of someone who has suspended their life pending the arrival of adequate love. It is the active, daily, specific choosing of standards that do not lower themselves to accommodate whatever is currently available. The distinction matters because the waiting posture and the holding out posture can look similar from the outside. Both involve not settling, but they produce very different interior experiences and very different outcomes. Waiting is organized around absence, around the not yet arrival of the thing being waited for. It has a suspended quality, a life on hold quality, a specific, draining orientation toward a future event that has not occurred and whose non-occurrence is the defining feature of the present. Holding out is organized around presence, around the full, active, forward-moving inhabiting of a life that is already happening. Around the maintenance of standards not as a barrier against the present, but as the honest expression of self-knowledge that travels with you into every interaction and every potential connection. It is not the refusal of love. It is the refusal of love that cannot meet the minimum. That distinction is worth carrying clearly into the days that follow this particular arc of understanding. The avoidant's deep regret, as examined throughout this conversation, is a genuine psychological event with real content and real consequences for their interior life. It is also, in the honest accounting, something that happened too late to change the specific dynamic it is reckoning with. The regret arrived after the damage, after the detachment, after the complete reorientation of your attention toward your own life. It arrived in the aftermath rather than in the midst. And its arrival in the aftermath means something specific about its relationship to the question of what comes next. What comes next, if anything, is not determined by the regret, not by its depth or its genuineness, or the specific honest quality of the reckoning it is producing. What comes next is determined by the behavioral evidence over time, by whether the reckoning that the regret initiated produces the specific instance-level ordinary conditions change that genuine reckoning points toward, by whether the avoidant who is in deep regret becomes, through the sustained and unglamorous work of actually changing the patterns that produce the regret, someone whose daily behavior matches the depth of feeling that the regret is revealing. That evidence has a timeline that belongs to them, to their interior work and their behavioral choices, and the specific daily repeated choosing of the open position over the defended one. It cannot be accelerated by your availability or slowed by your absence. It unfolds at the pace of genuine change, which is not the pace of urgency or the pace of activated loss, or the pace of the regret's acute phase. It is slower, more ordinary, less emotionally compelling than the regret itself. And it is the only thing worth treating as the answer to the question of what the regret ultimately produces. There is something worth saying about forgiveness in the context of deep avoidant regret, not as an obligation or a recommendation, but as an honest examination of what forgiveness is and what it is not, and what its relationship to the situation actually looks like. Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. It is not the reopening of the dynamic. It is not the restoration of trust or the resumption of investment or the availability of yourself to someone who has not yet demonstrated through behavioral evidence that the patterns have changed. Forgiveness can exist entirely independently of any of those things, can be a private, interior, self-directed act that has nothing to do with the avoidant's access to you or the future of the connection. What forgiveness actually is, in the most practically useful sense, is the release of the carrying, the specific, ongoing, energy-consuming act of holding the hurt in a form that continues to require active maintenance. The resentment that keeps the wound open, the specific, pointed, sustained quality of unforgiveness that is not simply the honest memory of what happened, but the ongoing investment of present tense energy in the management of past tense hurt. Forgiveness releases the carrying, not the memory, not the honest accounting, not the standards that the experience established, just the carrying, the specific weight of maintained grievance that is costing you present tense resources without producing anything useful in return. Whether you are ready to release the carrying is something only you know. It is not a moral obligation that arrives on a particular timeline. It is a readiness that develops at its own pace, in the honest, unforced way that genuine internal shifts develop. It cannot be performed into existence before the readiness is genuine. Performed forgiveness is not forgiveness. It is the social presentation of forgiveness while the carrying continues underneath. When the readiness arrives, and it may have already arrived in partial forms, in the specific moments when the wound is less present than it once was, when the memory carries less weight than it did at the acute phase, allow it to be what it is, not as a gift to the avoidant, as a release for yourself, as the honest completion of the carrying that the experience required, and the recognition that the carrying has done what carrying does, and is no longer serving the purpose that justified its cost. The avoidant is in deep regret. You are in the specific, quiet, forward-moving process of building the life that the detachment was always pointing toward. These two things are happening simultaneously, in parallel, on different sides of a distance that the detachment created and that the regret has not yet bridged in any behavioral, evidenced, trustworthy form. They are doing their work. You are doing yours. The work is different in kind, and different in timing, and different in what it is building towards. Their work is retrospective, looking back at the pattern, accounting for it, reckoning with its specific content and its specific cost. Building, through the sustained and honest engagement with the regret, the genuine understanding of what the patterns were producing and what changing them would require. That work, done honestly, produces the beginning of something genuinely different, not the conclusion, the beginning. Your work is perspective, not primarily organized around the past dynamic, but around the forward-moving, life-inhabiting, genuinely yours project of becoming more fully yourself in the aftermath of something that cost you something real. That work is building the specific, concrete, behavioral and interior evidence of someone who knows their worth and maintains the standards it requires, and inhabits their own life with the full attention that the dynamic was consuming. These two works might converge if the avoidance reckoning produces the genuine, behavioral, over time change that reckoning points towards. If the evidence arrives in the specific, consistent, ordinary conditions form that distinguishes genuine change from managed return, if the convergence when it becomes possible is something you want to engage with on the terms that your work has established as the minimum, they might not converge. The regret might produce a partial reckoning that restores the equilibrium without the full change. The behavioral evidence might not arrive in the form required. The distance might become permanent, and that too is a viable outcome. Not the ideal one, perhaps. Not the one that honors the genuine depth of what existed, but a viable one, one that your work has prepared you for. One that the detachment and the complete reorientation and the building of the life that belongs entirely to you has made survivable in the specific, grounded, genuinely okay way of someone who is not depending on any particular external outcome to be whole. You are whole, not because the dynamic is resolved, or because the regret produced what it pointed toward, or because any particular external event occurred to make the wholeness available. Because the work was done. The honest, costly, often unglamorous work of choosing yourself through the full arc of this experience. Of maintaining the accurate accounting when the dynamic kept producing alternative framings. Of detaching completely when complete detachment was what the honest assessment of the situation required. Of building in the quiet of the absence the ground that is yours permanently. The avoidant's deep regret is real. Your wholeness is also real. Both exist simultaneously, and only one of them is yours to carry forward. The one that was built through everything the experience required. The one that belongs to you, completely, now, and in every ordinary day that follows.